Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Louisa. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe, and if you're coming back, welcome back. I have to say thank you so much to the people who have been offering encouragement and support. I definitely appreciate it. So the topic of today's video is the quintessential Karen in churches. When we're reading some of the epistles from the apostles in the New Testament, it's tempting to think that people were different back then, or that they were somehow special and exempt from some of the issues that we currently have today. But the thing is, people have been people for thousands of years. I mean, that's kind of the point. That's kind of why we need Jesus. And one of the reasons why the epistles are so important in Christianity today and pretty much forever is because they outline all of the same issues that we will repeatedly keep coming up against whenever we have churches of people. There's a parable that Jesus talks about, which is called the wheat and the tares. And in that parable, he talks about how the word of God is like seeds of wheat. And so the farmer goes out and plants the wheat, and then during the night, his enemy comes along and sows tares. Now, tares are a type of weed, and they look a lot like wheat, but they don't produce any fruit. And that's essentially what you always have in Christianity. You have people who look like Christians, but they're not bearing any fruit. And so they are basically the enemy close to home. So the apostles were dealing with the same stuff that present-day pastors are still dealing with, because that's the nature of the enemy. He keeps trying to undermine the church from within. One of the best ways to undermine the church is to effectively knock out at least 50% of Christians so that they're not sharing the gospel. And that's exactly what we see with a lot of churches, where they effectively silence women because of a few passages in the Bible, one of which I'm going to talk about today, which is in 1 Corinthians. But the thing that we have to remember whenever we're reading the Bible is they did have certain specific cultural challenges at the time to do with the competing pagan religions. So there's that to take into consideration. And the next thing to take into consideration is that they might be addressing a specific problem and not a global commandment. So one of the best books on this particular issue is The Handmaiden's Conspiracy by Donna Howe. And you can get this from Skywatch TV. I will post a link in the description box for you. And I just have to say, the front cover is like... But aside from being very true in that a lot of women feel silenced in Christianity, the other thing that this particular cover represents is the fact that half of Christians are not preaching the gospel in their community because they don't feel like they're allowed to. It's kind of like entering into the spiritual battle with one hand tied behind your back. You might be able to get somewhere, but you are effectively hobbling yourself if you shut up half of your workers. As it also says in the Bible, the harvest is ready, but the workers are few. And if the few workers that we have are then halved, that's an even bigger issue. So we're going to have a look at 1 Corinthians chapter 14, which is where we see one of these particular passages that often gets misinterpreted and misapplied. How is it then, brethren, whenever you come together, each of you has a psalm, has a teaching, has a tongue, has a revelation, has an interpretation? Let all things be done for edification. If anyone speaks in a tongue, let there be 2 or at the most 3, each in turn, and let one interpret. But if there is no interpreter, let him keep silent in church, and let him speak to himself and to God. Let 2 or 3 prophets speak, and let the others judge. But if anything is revealed to another who sits by, let the first keep silent. For you can all prophesy one by one, that all may learn and all may be encouraged. And the spirits of the prophets are subject to the prophets, for God is not the author of confusion, but of peace, as in all the churches of the saints. Let your women keep silent in the churches, for they are not permitted to speak, but they are to be submissive, as the law also says. And if they want to learn something, let them ask their own husbands at home, for it is shameful for women to speak in church. Or did the word of God come originally from you? Or was it you only that it reached? If anyone thinks himself to be a prophet or spiritual, let him acknowledge that the things which I write to you are the commandments of the Lord. But if anyone is ignorant, let him be ignorant. Therefore, brethren, desire earnestly to prophesy, and do not forbid to speak with tongues. Let all things be done decently and in order. So this passage is generally talking to the church in Corinth about order during the service, and it's addressed to both men and women. It starts out by saying that people should not be just speaking over the top of each other in all of these tongues, and it's chaos and babbling. So that first part is addressing men who are doing this, and then the second part is addressing women who are doing this. So we have to look at the use of context in this passage and also at the use of language in this passage. And as Donna Howell points out in her book, the activity that was going on in that church, which is being addressed by Paul, is very relevant to the situation. So when it says, "For it is shameful for women to speak in church," the word used in Greek is laleo, which literally just means talk. And it can be used in a number of different applications. So it can also be used to represent chat. It is shameful for women to have a chat in church. And so I wanted to give you guys a quick depiction of what this looks like, which I have experienced in my time before moving to Tasmania. I worked for 10 years in public libraries. And in my role as a library technician in public libraries, I had a few things that I had to do. I had to look after the technical equipment because I was the technology officer, which meant that I also ran classes on IT. So I would be teaching people how to use computers, how to use email, that sort of thing. But one of the things that I also did, strangely enough, was doing toddler story times. If someone was on holidays, I would step in and do the toddler story times, and I have to say, give me a group of 30 toddlers over their parents any day. I can deal with a 3-year-old that's trying to grab the book out of my hands. They can't get that far with me. But a bunch of parents that are busy having a chat while I'm trying to read a book, that is rude. So the reason why I have a chair next to me, if you haven't noticed, I wanted to kind of illustrate what it is that I'm talking about. So there was one time I had to fill in for the regular storyteller because she was on holidays. And so I went and did the toddler story time, and I'm sitting up the front of the room. I've got my books, I've got a list of songs for the children, and I'm ready to go. And these two ladies that I had never seen before, they came and sat right next to me, touching, which at first I thought was a bit weird. I hadn't come across these ladies before because it had been a while since I had done the story time. And when you're dealing with toddlers, they grow really quickly. So you have a high turnover of different families with the story time. So I had not heard about these ladies before. Anyway, I start with the songs and the activities, and it's very exuberant. We're all dancing around, having a good time. And then I get to the first book, and these ladies are chatting between themselves right next to me. When it came to the story times, it was hard enough to make yourself heard over parents who were chatting up the back of the room. If they were right next to you, you had no chance. And then the most shocking thing happened. One of the ladies got out her phone and started playing a video for her friend. Again, right next to me. And I stopped the whole session. I stopped the whole session and I made them move. The fact that I had to discipline someone who was older than me and should have known better is kind of just part of the gobsmacking reality that is human beings. And I can totally imagine this situation happening in church. If you've got a bunch of men who are jumping up, speaking in tongues, woo! And then you've got their wives who are like, oh, did you hear about Sandra? Oh, that was so shocking. Oh my gosh, let me play you the video. I, for one, cannot imagine being her husband. Karens. Karens have always been a reality in the church. They might have looked different, they might not have had phones, but they have always been there. And this is half the struggle that you see in the epistles of the apostles, is basically these poor men who spent either half of their time in prison and the other half of their time herding cats. And then at the end of it, they get executed. I mean, you have to really love Jesus to do this. If you think that Karens are a recent invention, I can pretty much guarantee that they have been around longer than the dinosaurs. There's probably a Karen dinosaur. I would even go so far as to say Satan is the first Karen. Like, I'm pretty sure he's still trying to talk to the manager. And this is the challenge that teachers and preachers still have to this day. Why do people behave this way? Like, it's very self-defeating. And I just want to say for the record that there are male Karens. Like, this is not restricted to just women. Paul was addressing men and women in 1 Corinthians. So I wanted to talk about 2 Timothy chapter 3, which kind of explains a little bit further what you're dealing with. But know this, that in the last days perilous times will come, for men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying its power, and from such people turn away. For of this sort are those who creep into households and make captives of gullible women, loaded down with sins, led away by various lusts, always learning, and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. Always learning, and never being able to come to a knowledge of the truth. And this is something that I can also illustrate from the library. As I mentioned before, I also used to teach technology classes. So I would have people who had never used the internet before, never had their own email address, and they needed to start from scratch. So I had to teach them all of the basics and walk them through it step by step, be very patient, be very clear. And when I first took over the role, we had classes which were scheduled and they were group classes. But I noticed that during the group classes, if there was one person who refused to learn, they would essentially stunt the rest of the class because they would just suck all of the energy, all of the attention, and all of the time from the teacher. And you either had to just completely ignore them and leave them in their error and ignorance in order to teach the rest of the class, or you had to spend an entire hour going over the same thing over and over and over. So in 1 Corinthians, where it says, "Let your women keep silent in the churches, for they are not permitted to chat, and they are to be submissive, as the law also says. And if they want to learn something, let them ask their own husbands at home." Now, again, this is unfortunately not just a female problem. In my technology classes, I would have a lot of men that did this, where it's like you're teaching a whole group of people and you're taking them through it step by step, and they don't want to learn. And if you allow them to derail the whole group and not just like get them to wait until later to clarify a few things, they will derail the whole group. And the thing is, it's not that what you're teaching them is complicated or difficult or that you can't explain it, because other people are learning quite effectively. It's not that that's the problem. The problem is that they don't want to learn. They want someone else to do it for them. People don't want to learn because then they have to take responsibility. If you know something, if you have learned what to do, you know the truth, you have full knowledge, then you are responsible. And I could teach a group of 8 people quite effectively if there was no one in the class like that. But if there was one person in the class like that, the whole class didn't learn. And I would be like, no, you can do it. It's so easy. I believe in you. You are so capable. You can do this. And then they would be annoyed because I wasn't either getting annoyed or giving in to them and like doing it for them. So they were like, like they wanted to have something from me that they could either get pissy about because I was saying, no, you need to do this, like grow up. Or they wanted me to just like do it for them. It's like, I can't just do it for you. Like, I'm not going to be around for the rest of your life. You need self-sufficiency in life. You can't get by without it. People with a genuine disability are an exception to this rule, but they don't have it easy. So I would be very encouraging to them, and then I would just leave them to it. And if they didn't do the thing, like I gave them a set of steps that they had to do. And if they were like, I don't want to, then I just left them. Like, a lot of the most manipulative people that you'll ever meet, they kind of like loll about and they're like, I'm helpless. It's like they have no shame. They really don't. They have no shame. And one of the problems is that a lot of the time people give into it and they just do it for them because they don't want to have to deal with the tantrum.
More! No. Yes! No. Yes! No! Yes! I said no. And I said yes, and I mean it. What makes you think that you have more authority than I do? And what makes you think you have more authority than me? Because I do! I'm a human person!
Lord. You know who this is? Not your shit.
And so unfortunately you get people who are perpetual learners and they never get to the point where they understand the truth, because if they admitted that they know, then they would understand that they are responsible, and they don't want the responsibility. And as it says in 2 Timothy chapter 3, after these verses, now as Jannes and Jambres resisted Moses, so do these also resist the truth. Men of corrupt minds, disapproved concerning the faith, but they will progress no further, for their folly will be manifest to all, as theirs also was. When people want to continue in their corruption, they tend to avoid the truth. And if you continue to hold them to the truth and continue to hold them to correct teachings, then they tend to get very angry. They'll corrupt other people's walk because they think that the more followers they have, the more true it is what they're saying. And that's where you get things like the prosperity gospel, where they've got massive audiences and they see this as proof of the truth. Like, if we have lots of people following us, it must be true. And yet Jesus pretty much says the opposite. Like, people will hate you for speaking the truth. So 1 Corinthians. I mean, that entire epistle is Paul basically trying to deal with an insane congregation. Like, stop sleeping with your stepmother. Stop getting drunk at the communion. Yeah, herding cats. So Paul's solution for women in the congregation who were like, I don't understand, was to say, like, ask your husband later at home. Don't interrupt the service. And his answer to the men who were like jumping up, jumping around, saying, I got a word of prophecy. His answer to that was, one at a time, and the entire congregation is going to judge your prophecy. If you claim to have a tongue, then you need it interpreted before it is okay. Otherwise, you're just disrupting the teaching. Okay, guys, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully that was helpful. If you have your own experiences of Karens, leave it in the comments. Male and female Karens. I'm not going to discriminate based on gender. All right, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.